Power. In New York City, power isn't just money. It's silence. It's the way a room goes dead quiet when a man like Adrian Moretti walks through the door. They called him Il Lupo the Wolf. He was a man who crushed empires with a signature and ended lives with a nod. He didn't believe in mercy, and he certainly didn't believe in love. But on a rainy Tuesday inside a crowded Manhattan restaurant, the most dangerous man in the city didn't fall for a supermodel or an heiress. He fell for a voice. A single sentence spoken in a dialect only he understood changed the fate of the underworld forever. This is the story of how a waitress didn't just serve a table, she unknowingly started a war. The rain in Manhattan didn't wash away the grime. It just made the neon lights bleed onto the pavement. Inside Cielo Notturno, one of the city's most exclusive Italian restaurants, the atmosphere was tight enough to snap a violin string. Audrey Rossi wiped her hands on her apron, her knuckles red from the heat of the kitchen pass. She was 23, with dark curls that refused to stay pinned back, and eyes the color of espresso dark alert, and currently exhausted. She wasn't supposed to be working the VIP section. That was for the senior staff, the ones who knew which wine paired with a six-figure business deal. But Sarah had called in sick, and the manager, a sweaty man named Mr. Henderson, had shoved Audrey onto the floor with a warning. "Don't screw this up, Rossi." Table 4 is the Moretti family. The name sent a chill through the kitchen staff, but Audrey kept her head down. She knew the name. Everyone in the boroughs knew the name. Adrian Moretti, the Don, the King of New York. When she walked out to the floor, she felt the shift in air pressure. Table 4 was in the corner, secluded by velvet ropes. 4 men in dark suits stood at the perimeter, their eyes scanning the room like predatory birds. At the table sat 2 people. One was a man who looked like he had been carved out of marble and nightmares. Adrian Moretti was 32, wearing a bespoke suit that cost more than Audrey's life earnings. He had a jawline sharp enough to cut glass and eyes that were a terrifying shade of icy blue. He was reading a briefing on his phone, completely ignoring the room. Next to him sat an elderly woman, frail and small, her hands trembling as she tried to butter a piece of bread. This was Isabella Moretti, the matriarch. Rumor had it she was suffering from dementia, her mind drifting between the past and present. Audrey approached cautiously with the water pitcher. As she poured, she watched the tragedy unfold. The elderly woman's hand shook violently. The silver butter knife clattered against the fine china, and with a sudden jerk she knocked over her glass of red wine. The crimson liquid splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and onto her expensive silk dress. The restaurant went silent. Isabella gasped, her eyes filling with instant terrified tears. She looked at her son, but Adrian was typing a message. His brow furrowed, unaware of the spill yet. A senior waiter, a pompous man named Claude, rushed over. He didn't see the fear in the old woman's eyes. He only saw the mess. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Claude hissed, his voice low, but dripping with disdain. He snatched a napkin, invading the old woman's space. "Madame, you must be more careful. This linen is imported." Isabella shrank back, trembling. "Mi dispiace, I didn't mean—" she stammered in broken English. Adrian's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto Claude. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. But before the Don could speak, before he could likely order Claude's execution, with a mere glance, Audrey moved. She dropped the water pitcher on a side tray and stepped between Claude and the old woman. She didn't look at the terrifying boss. She looked only at the terrified mother. Audrey gently took Isabella's trembling, wine-stained hand. She ignored the spilled wine. She ignored the staring bodyguards. She leaned down, bringing her face level with the elderly woman, and spoke softly. Non preoccuparti, nonna. È solo vino. Porta fortuna, ricordi. Don't worry, Grandma. It's just wine. It brings good luck. Remember. Isabella blinked her panic, pausing. She looked at Audrey, hearing the familiar cadence of her homeland. Not just Italian, but the specific rustic dialect of Sicily, the dialect of the old country. Sicilia, Isabella whispered. Audrey smiled, a genuine, warm expression that lit up her tired face. Sì, le macchie si lavano via, ma la tua eleganza rimane per sempre. Lascia che ti aiuti. Yes, stains wash away, but your elegance remains forever. Let me help you. Audrey took a clean cloth and dabbed the wine from Isabella's hands with the tenderness of a daughter. She hummed a tiny fragmentation of an old folk song, Ciuri, Ciuri, as she worked. Isabella's shoulders dropped. The terror vanished, replaced by a soft, nostalgic smile. She reached out and cupped Audrey's cheek. You have kind eyes, like my sister. Grazie, signora, Audrey whispered. Only then did Audrey realize the silence in the restaurant was absolute. She slowly straightened up and turned. Adrian Moretti was no longer looking at his phone. He was looking at her. He hadn't moved a muscle, but the intensity of his stare felt like a physical weight. He wasn't looking at her like a waitress. He was looking at her like she was a riddle he needed to solve. His blue eyes traveled from her messy hair down her cheap uniform to her hands, which were still holding his mother's with such care. Claude, the rude waiter, was pale, realizing he had just insulted the Don's mother and been upstaged by a nobody. Adrian stood up. He was tall, looming over the table. He ignored Claude entirely. He walked around the table, his movements fluid and dangerous, until he stood inches from Audrey. She could smell him expensive leather tobacco and something sharp like ozone. She clutched the dirty napkin, her heart hammering against her ribs. I'm going to get fired, or killed. Adrian looked down at his mother, who was now calm and smiling, then back at Audrey. What is your name? His voice was a deep baritone, rough like gravel. Audrey, she managed to squeak. Audrey Rossi, sir. You speak the dialect of Palermo, he stated. It wasn't a question. My grandmother taught me, sir, before she passed. Adrian studied her face for a second longer than was comfortable. He reached into his jacket pocket. Audrey flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a black card, heavy and matte. He placed it on the table, then reached out and took Audrey's hand. His skin was hot, his grip firm. He raised her hand, kissing the knuckles that were red from scrubbing dishes. Nobody has made her smile in 6 months, Adrian said softly, his eyes locking onto hers. You didn't just clean a table, Tesoro. You just stole my heart. The line was delivered with zero irony. It was a statement of fact, terrifying in its sincerity. I was just doing my job, Audrey whispered. No, Adrian said, releasing her hand. He turned to his head of security. Matteo, ensure Claude is educated on how to treat a lady. And get the car. Adrian helped his mother up. As they walked out, Isabella turned back and waved at Audrey. Adrian didn't look back. He didn't have to. He had already memorized her face. Audrey stood there trembling as the restaurant staff stared at her. She looked down at the table. Adrian hadn't left a credit card for the bill. He had left a business card with a personal number, and underneath it, a stack of $100 bills that looked like a brick. She didn't know it yet, but the moment she spoke those words, she had ceased to be a waitress. She had become the obsession of the wolf. The adrenaline from the encounter at Cielo Notturno wore off by the time Audrey got back to her apartment in Queens, replaced by the crushing reality of her life. Her apartment was a fourth-floor walk-up with a radiator that hissed but gave no heat and a window that wouldn't close all the way. She threw her keys on the wobbly table and stared at the stack of cash Adrian Moretti had left. $5,000. It was more money than she made in 4 months. It felt like blood money. She shoved it into a drawer. She couldn't spend it. Audrey Rossi wasn't just a waitress. She was a ghost. She had spent the last 5 years hiding, changing her last name, dyeing her hair, and moving from city to city. Her father, a low-level accountant for a mob family in Chicago, had skimmed money and gotten himself killed. The debt, however, had passed to her. The Vitti family rivals to the Morettis were still looking for her. If she drew attention to herself, if she flashed money around, they would find her. "Just keep your head down, Audrey," she whispered to the empty room. "1 more year, save enough to move to Europe, and you're free." The next morning, the world fell apart. She arrived at the restaurant to find the doors locked. Mr. Henderson was outside, looking pale. "What's going on?" Audrey asked. "New ownership," Henderson said, his voice shaking. "They bought the place this morning. Cash offer. They fired everyone, except you." Audrey's stomach dropped. "What? There's a car waiting for you, Rossi." Henderson pointed to the curb. A sleek black SUV with tinted windows sat idling. A man in a suit, Matteo, the head of security she had seen last night, stepped out. He was built like a tank, with a scar running through his eyebrow. "Miss Rossi," Matteo said, "Mr. Moretti requests your presence." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Audrey said, backing away. "I quit." Matteo didn't look aggressive. He looked bored. "Mr. Moretti doesn't accept resignations from employees he hasn't hired yet. And he is aware of your housing situation." Audrey froze. "What do you mean?" Matteo held up a piece of paper. It was an eviction notice for her apartment. "Your landlord is selling the building. Today. You have nowhere to go, Audrey. Or should I say, Audrey Caruso." The air left her lungs. They knew. In less than 12 hours, Adrian Moretti had dug up the identity she had spent 5 years burying. "If the Vitti family finds out I'm here," she whispered. "The Vitti family are rats," Matteo spat. "Under Mr. Moretti's protection, you are untouchable. But you have to get in the car." She looked at the street. It was broad daylight, but she knew how this worked. She could run, but she wouldn't get far. Adrian Moretti had just bought her workplace and her apartment building. He was closing the net. She walked to the car and got in. The drive took 40 minutes leading out of the city to a sprawling estate in Long Island. High walls, iron gates, and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. It was a fortress. She was led into a massive library that smelled of old paper and brandy. Adrian stood by the fireplace looking at a painting. He turned when she entered. Without the noise of the restaurant, he was even more imposing. The silence around him was heavy. "You ran a good scam, Miss Caruso." Adrian said, his voice calm. "Hiding in plain sight." "I'm not a scammer," Audrey said, her voice trembling but defiant. "I'm surviving. My father made mistakes. I'm just trying to pay for them." "Your father was a thief," Adrian said, stepping closer. "But you are something else. My mother hasn't stopped asking for the girl with the song since last night. Is that why I'm here to be a babysitter?" Adrian stopped directly in front of her. "My mother is the only pure thing in my life. Everyone else wants money, power, or my head on a stick. She just wants peace. You gave her that." He picked up a document from the desk and handed it to her. "This is a contract. You will live here. You will be her personal companion. You will speak to her in Italian, cook her the food she likes, and ensure she is happy." Audrey scanned the paper. The salary was astronomical, enough to pay off her father's debt in 6 months. "And if I refuse, then I open the gates," Adrian said coldly. "And I let Marco Vitti know exactly where the daughter of the man who stole from him is living." Audrey looked up at him, hate burning in her eyes. "You're a monster." Adrian leaned in his face inches from hers. His blue eyes darkened. "I am a king, Audrey. And kings do what is necessary, but I am offering you a golden cage. Inside these walls, the Vitti family cannot touch you. You are mine." The possession in his voice made her shiver. It wasn't just about his mother. She could feel it. He wanted her here where he could see her. "I have conditions," she said, surprising herself. Adrian raised an eyebrow, amused. "You are in no position to negotiate, Tesoro. I want my debt paid off, directly to the Vittis, anonymous, so I don't have to look over my shoulder when I leave here." Adrian stared at her. For a moment she thought he would strike her. Then a slow, predatory smirk curved his lips. "Done. I'll pay Marco his pennies." He reached out and tucked a loose curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her neck, his thumb brushing her pulse point. Her heart was racing and she knew he could feel it. "Welcome to the family, Audrey." He walked past her toward the door. "Dinner is at 8. Wear something nice. I burned that waitress uniform." Audrey stood alone in the library, surrounded by millions of dollars of art, feeling like the most valuable and trapped object in the room. She was safe from the sharks in Chicago, but she was locked in the water with the Great White. She didn't know that by entering the house, she had just walked into the center of a target, because the Vitti family wasn't the only threat. There was a traitor inside the Moretti organization, someone close to Adrian, and they were watching this new maid with very suspicious eyes. The dress lay on the bed like a pool of liquid emerald. Audrey stared at it for a long time. It was silk backless and terrifyingly elegant. There was no price tag, but she knew enough about fabric to know this single garment cost more than her father's funeral. Next to it was a small velvet box containing simple teardrop diamond earrings. She felt like a doll being dressed for a play she didn't audition for. "I am not one of them," she whispered to herself, tracing the scar on her palm, a souvenir from a broken glass in a dive bar 3 years ago. "I am Audrey from Queens. I survive." When she descended the grand staircase at 7:55 p.m., the house was silent. The Moretti estate was a masterpiece of architecture, high ceilings, marble floors, dark mahogany wood. But it felt devoid of life. It was a museum, not a home. She found the dining room. The table was long enough to seat 20, but it was set for 3. The lighting was dim, provided by a crystal chandelier that cast fractured shadows against the walls. Adrian was already there. He stood by the drink cart, pouring an amber liquid into a crystal tumbler. He was out of his suit jacket, wearing a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing forearms that were thick with muscle and marked by faint white scars. He turned as she entered. His hand paused in mid-air. The silence stretched thick and heavy. Adrian's eyes, that piercing glacial blue, started at her shoes and traveled slowly, agonizingly up to her eyes. It wasn't a lecherous look. It was an assessment. He was looking at her the way a man looks at a weapon he has just purchased, admiring the balance, the danger, and the beauty. "Green," Adrian said, his voice low and vibrating through the quiet room. "I knew it would suit you." Audrey gripped her clutch to stop her hands from shaking. "It's a beautiful dress, Mr. Moretti. Thank you." "Adrian," he corrected, walking toward her. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough for her to smell the whiskey and the faint metallic scent of gun oil that seemed to cling to him. "In this house, when we break bread, you call me Adrian." "Adrian." She tested the name. It felt intimate, dangerous. "My mother is already seated," he said, gesturing to the table. Isabella Moretti was sitting at the head of the table, looking lucid and happy. She was wearing a deep blue shawl. When she saw Audrey, her face lit up. "Audrey, vieni qui cara." "Audrey." "Come here, dear." Audrey hurried to her, grateful for the distraction. She sat next to the old woman, immediately falling into the role of caretaker. She poured Isabella's water, adjusted her napkin, and spoke to her in soft, rapid Sicilian. Adrian sat opposite them. He didn't eat immediately. He watched. He watched how Audrey's tense shoulders relaxed when she spoke to his mother. He watched the genuine smile that touched her lips, a smile she never gave him. He watched her cut Isabella's steak into small, manageable pieces with a grace that defied her rough background. "You have good hands," Adrian said suddenly. Audrey looked up, startled. "Excuse me. You cut the meat with precision. You handle her with care. You don't tremble." He took a sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. "Most people tremble when they are near me." "I'm terrified of you," Audrey admitted, her voice steady. "But I'm not afraid of her. She reminds me of my nonna." Adrian leaned back, intrigued. "Your father was an accountant for the Chicago outfit. Did he teach you to be brave?" The air grew cold. Bringing up her father was a reminder of the leash he held her on. "My father taught me how to count money and how to hide," Audrey said, her appetite vanishing. "My bravery I learned on my own, after he left me with his mess." Adrian's expression shifted. A flicker of respect passed through his eyes. He was a weak man. I despise weak men. "He was my father," Audrey shot back. Before Adrian could respond, the heavy oak doors of the dining room swung open. A man walked in. He was younger than Adrian, perhaps 28, with slicked-back dark hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore a suit that was too loud a shade of grey that shimmered under the lights. This was Stefano Ricci, Adrian's cousin, and the underboss of the Moretti family. "Sorry I'm late," Stefano announced, his voice booming and destroying the intimate atmosphere. "Business in the Bronx took longer than expected. They bleed slowly up there." He laughed at his own joke. Adrian didn't smile. Stefano pulled out the chair next to Adrian, then paused as he noticed Audrey. His eyes raked over her, crude and hungry, stripping her naked with a single glance. It was the opposite of Adrian's calculated assessment. This was purely predatory. "And who is this?" Stefano grinned, showing too many teeth. "I didn't know we were ordering dessert before dinner." Audrey stiffened. "Watch your tongue, Stefano," Adrian said. His voice didn't rise, but the temperature in the room plummeted. "This is Audrey. She is here for Mama." Stefano chuckled, pouring himself wine without asking. "For Zia Isabella." Look at her, Adrian. She's wearing $5,000 worth of silk. She's not here to change bedpans." He looked directly at Audrey. "So how much is he paying you, sweetheart? Or are you working off a debt? That's usually how the pretty ones end up here." Audrey felt the shame burn her cheeks. She gripped her fork, her knuckles turning white. "Audrey is a guest," Adrian said. The glass in his hand cracked. A hairline fracture appeared, and a single drop of red wine leaked out onto his hand. "And you are ruining my digestion." Stefano saw the cracked glass and the look in Adrian's eyes. The smile vanished from his face instantly. He cleared his throat. "My apologies. Cugino, just a joke." "Apologize to her," Adrian commanded. Stefano's jaw tightened. He turned to Audrey, his eyes hard and resentful. "Apologies, signorina." "It's fine," Audrey whispered, looking down at her plate. The rest of the dinner was agonizing. Stefano ate voraciously, talking about shipments and territories, trying to assert his importance. Adrian answered in monosyllables, his eyes frequently darting to Audrey, gauging her reaction to the violence inherent in their conversation. Isabella, happily oblivious in her own world, hummed a tune, occasionally patting Audrey's hand. When dinner ended, Audrey excused herself rapidly, needing to escape the suffocating tension. "I will help Mama to her room," she said, fleeing the table. Adrian watched her go. Once the doors closed, he turned to Stefano. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with suppressed violence. "Do not look at her again," Adrian said softly. Stefano wiped his mouth with a napkin, his eyes narrowing. "She's a liability, Adrian. A nobody. You bring a stray dog into the house, don't be surprised if it has fleas. Who is she really? She is the only person who can calm my mother. That makes her more valuable to me than you are right now." Stefano stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Careful, Cugino. You're getting soft, and the Vitti family is circling. You don't have time to play house." Stefano walked out, leaving Adrian alone in the shadows. Adrian looked at the empty chair where Audrey had sat. He picked up her wine glass, turning it so his fingers touched the place where her lips had been. He wasn't playing house. He was protecting what was his. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he was the jailer or the prisoner. 2 weeks passed. The golden toll was beautiful, but it was still a cage. Audrey fell into a routine. Mornings were spent in the garden with Isabella, afternoons in the sunroom, reading to her, and evenings. Evenings were the hardest. Evenings were when the house came alive with the business of war. Men would come and go, captains, soldiers, politicians. The library was the war room, and Audrey learned to avoid the west wing of the house. But she couldn't avoid Adrian. He was everywhere. He didn't speak to her often, but she felt his presence. He would stand on the balcony, while she walked in the garden. He would pause in the hallway when he heard her singing to Isabella. It was a slow, simmering awareness that was driving her mad. One rainy Thursday, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The guards were double-staffed. The phone lines were ringing constantly. Audrey was in the kitchen making a late-night herbal tea for Isabella, who had been agitated all day. The kitchen was the one place Audrey felt normal. The stainless steel, the smell of basil and garlic, it grounded her. She was waiting for the kettle to boil when she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. She turned, expecting the cook or perhaps a guard. It was Stefano, no. He was drunk, his tie was loose and his face was flushed. He leaned against the doorframe, blocking her exit. "The little nurse!" Stefano slurred, smiling that oily smile. "You know I did some digging. Audrey Caruso." Audrey's heart hammered against her ribs. She backed up against the counter. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Chicago." Stefano stepped into the room. Your daddy was a rat, a thief. He stole from Marco Vitti. He's dead, Audrey said, her voice shaking. Leave me alone. Did he teach you to steal too? Stefano moved closer, invading her personal space. He smelled of sour wine and aggression. Adrian thinks you're a saint, but I know what you are. You're a hustler. You used that seed story to get into his bed. I'm not in his bed, Audrey shouted, grabbing the handle of a heavy cast-iron skillet on the stove. Not yet. Stefano laughed. He reached out and grabbed a lock of her hair, twisting it around his finger. But we can change that. Why don't you show me what you're really good at? Maybe I won't tell the Vittis where you are. Don't touch me. Audrey swung the skillet. She missed his head, but the heavy iron struck his shoulder hard. Stefano roared in pain and anger. He lunged at her, pinning her against the granite countertop. His hand clamped around her throat, cutting off her air. You bitch, he hissed. I'll teach you. Suddenly, Stefano was ripped away from her, as if he weighed nothing. Audrey gasped for air, sliding down to the floor, coughing. Through her watering eyes, she saw a blur of motion. Adrian had Stefano by the throat. He slammed his cousin against the industrial refrigerator with a force that dented the steel. Adrian wasn't yelling. He was terrifyingly silent. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He held Stefano, a man of 200 pounds, off the ground with one hand. Adrian, Stefano gagged, clawing at Adrian's arm. I told you. Adrian whispered, his voice sounding like grinding stones. I told you she was off limits. Adrian drew a gun from his waistband. He pressed the barrel into the soft flesh under Stefano's jaw. Adrian, no, Audrey screamed. The sound of her voice seemed to snap Adrian out of his trance. He froze. He looked at Audrey huddled on the floor, clutching her neck. Then he looked at Stefano, whose eyes were bulging with fear. Adrian didn't pull the trigger. Instead, he pistol-whipped Stefano across the face. The sound was sickening steel, hitting bone. Stefano crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Adrian turned to the two guards who had just run into the kitchen, drawn by the noise. Get him out of here, Adrian commanded, pointing at his cousin's body. Lock him in the cellar. If he wakes up, tell him if he speaks, I will cut out his tongue. The guards dragged Stefano away, leaving a smear of blood on the white tiles. Adrian stood there, breathing heavily. He holstered his gun and turned to Audrey. The rage vanished from his eyes, replaced by a frantic worry. He dropped to his knees in front of her. Audrey! He reached out, but his hands were shaking. He hovered them over her neck, where red marks were already forming. Did he? Adrian couldn't finish the sentence. I'm okay, Audrey rasped, though she was trembling violently. I'm okay. I should have killed him, Adrian said, his voice dark. I should have put a bullet in his brain. No. Audrey grabbed his hands. His skin was rough, his knuckles bruised from the impact. No more death. Please. Adrian looked at her hands holding his. He looked into her eyes, seeing the fear, but realizing that for the first time the fear wasn't directed at him. She was seeking comfort from him. I promised you safety, Adrian said, his voice thick with emotion. And I failed. Under my own roof, I failed. You came, she whispered. You stopped him. Adrian moved closer. The adrenaline of the violence was fading, replaced by a magnetic pull he could no longer resist. He brought one hand up to cup her jaw, his thumb gently tracing the bruise forming on her neck. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone hurt you again, he vowed. The distance between them vanished. The air was charged with the scent of rain and danger. Audrey didn't pull away. She leaned into his touch, her eyes fluttering shut. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me? I'm just a waitress." Adrian leaned his forehead against hers. "You are the only person who sees me, Audrey. Not the boss, not the wolf. Just a man who loves his mother." He pulled back slightly to look at her lips. He wanted to kiss her. God, he wanted to kiss her. But he saw the tremor in her hands. She was in shock. He stood up and effortlessly scooped her into his arms. "Adrian, I can walk," she protested weakly. "Not tonight," he said. He carried her out of the kitchen, through the silent house and up the stairs. He didn't take her to his room. He took her to hers. He laid her gently on the bed and pulled the duvet over her. He sat on the edge of the mattress, not moving to leave. "Sleep," he said softly. "I will stay right here. No one enters this door unless they go through me." Audrey looked at him, the most dangerous man in New York, sitting guard like a loyal sentry. "Thank you," she whispered. Adrian waited until her breathing evened out, and she fell into a restless sleep. Then he pulled out his phone. He sent a single text message to Matteo. "Find the leak. Stefano knows things he shouldn't. Someone is feeding him info. And double the perimeter." He looked back at Audrey. He knew then that the golden cage was no longer enough. The war was coming inside the walls, and to keep her, he would have to become the monster everyone feared he was. The morning sun that hit the Moretti estate was pale and heatless, filtering through the grey clouds that hung over Long Island like a shroud. The storm had passed, but the air remained heavy, charged with the ozone scent of lightning and the metallic tang of impending violence. Audrey awoke to the sound of silence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the holding of breath. She touched her neck. The bruises from Stefano's fingers were blossoming into ugly shades of violet and yellow. She walked to the window, wrapping her silk robe tighter around herself. Below on the gravel driveway, the guard rotation was changing. There were twice as many men as yesterday. They carried assault rifles openly, now no longer trying to hide the nature of Adrian's business. There was a knock at the door. It wasn't the housekeeper. The knock was firm, rhythmic, 2 taps, a pause, 1 tap. "Come in," she whispered. Adrian entered. He looked as though he hadn't slept. His white shirt was fresh, but his eyes were rimmed with red, and the shadow of a beard darkened his jaw. He carried a small tray with espresso and a warm cornetto. "I didn't want the staff to wake you," he said, his voice rough. He set the tray on the vanity table. "How is your neck?" "It hurts," Audrey admitted, turning to face him. She didn't cover the bruises. She wanted him to see the cost of his world. Adrian flinched visibly as his eyes landed on the marks. He walked over to her, stopping inches away. He reached out his hand, hovering near her throat, terrified to touch her and cause more pain. "Stefano will never touch you again," Adrian vowed quietly. "He is being handled." "Is he dead?" Audrey asked. She was surprised by how steady her voice was. A month ago, the thought of death would have made her faint. Now it felt like a necessary question. "No," Adrian said. "Death is too easy. He is in the cellar. He talked." Adrian walked to the window, looking out at his fortified empire. "He didn't just stumble upon your identity, Audrey. He was fed it, and then he sold it. Sold it. To Marco Vitti, my cousin, my own blood, sold your location to the Vittis in exchange for a guarantee of safety when they move against me. He planned to open the gates for them. Tonight." Audrey felt the blood drain from her face. "Tonight, we stopped it." Adrian turned back to her. "But the element of surprise is gone. The Vitti family knows you are here. They know the layout of the estate thanks to Stefano Mo. This house is no longer a fortress. It is a trap. He took a step closer, his icy blue eyes burning with intensity. I have to move you. You and Mama. I have a safe house in the Catskills. It's isolated, defensible. We leave in 1 hour. And you? Audrey asked. I will stay here. I will draw them in. If they think I am vulnerable, they will attack. And I will end this war where it started. No, Audrey said firmly. Adrian blinked. Audrey, this is not a negotiation. You said Mama needs me, Audrey argued, stepping into his space. If you stay here and die, do you think she will survive that? Do you think I will survive that? The confession hung in the air. Do you think I will survive that? It wasn't about physical survival. It was about her heart. Adrian stared at her, his stoic mask cracking. The ruthless Don the Wolf of New York looked momentarily lost. Audrey, he whispered, his voice breaking. You are the only good thing that has happened to me in 10 years. If a bullet meant for me hits you, then don't let it, she said. She reached up and took his face in her hands. His skin was hot, his jaw tense. Come with us. Fight from the mountains. Don't be a martyr, Adrian. Be a survivor. For her. For us. The word us shattered his resolve. Adrian groaned a low sound deep in his throat and crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fueled by fear and adrenaline and weeks of suppressed longing. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no air between them. Audrey kissed him back with equal force, tasting the coffee and the danger on his tongue. It was acclaiming a promise that if they went down, they would go down together. He pulled back, breathless, resting his forehead against hers. Okay, he breathed. Okay, we all go. But you do exactly what I say. You don't leave my side. Not for a second. I promise, she whispered. Adrian checked his watch. The mask of the Don slid back into place, but his eyes remained soft when they looked at her. Pack a bag, only essentials. Wear comfortable shoes. We leave in 40 minutes. As he walked to the door, he paused. Audrey, yes, when this is over, when the snow settles, I'm going to take you to Palermo, for real. I want to hear you sing to Mama in the place where the song was written. I'd like that. She smiled weakly. He nodded and left. Audrey turned to the closet. She didn't pack the silk dresses. She packed jeans, heavy sweaters, and boots. And at the bottom of the bag, she placed the sharpest paring knife from the fruit bowl on the table. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was the wolf's companion, and she wouldn't be helpless. The convoy consisted of 3 armored SUVs. They were black, nondescript beasts with bulletproof glass and reinforced tires. Adrian, Audrey, and Isabella were in the middle vehicle. Matteo was driving. 2 other guards, heavily armed, sat in the front passenger seat and the 3rd row. Isabella was confused. The sudden movement, the rush, had upset her fragile grasp on reality. Dove stiamo andando, Enzo? Where are we going, Enzo? She asked, clutching her rosary beads. Her eyes darted around the dark interior of the car. Adrian sat in the back with them, his body angled toward the window, scanning the highway. He reached out and squeezed her hand without looking away from the road. A fare una vacanza, mamma. In montagna. C'è la neve. On a vacation. Mama. To the mountains. There is snow. Audrey sat between them. She held Isabella's other hand, rubbing it rhythmically. She could feel the tension radiating off Adrian, like heat from a furnace. He had a submachine gun resting by his feet, covered by a coat. They had cleared the city limits and were driving north on the Palisades Parkway. The trees were bare, skeletal fingers reaching up to the grey sky. Traffic was light. "Status," Adrian barked into his comms earpiece. "Lead car clear," came the crackled response. "Rear car clear. No tails." Adrian didn't relax. "Matteo, keep the spacing tight. I don't like this stretch. Too many overpasses." "Si, capo." Matteo set his eyes glued to the rear-view mirror. Audrey looked at Adrian. "You think they're following us?" "I think Marco Vitti is a coward," Adrian said tightly. "And cowards don't attack fortresses. They attack on the road." As if summoned by his words, the world exploded. The lead SUV 50 yards ahead of them suddenly erupted into a fireball. The sound was deafening, a thunderclap that shook the very chassis of their car. The vehicle flipped into the air, twisting like a toy, and crashed down in the middle of the highway, skidding in a shower of sparks and burning metal. "Ambush!" Matteo screamed, slamming on the brakes. Their SUV swerved violently, the tires screeching against the asphalt. Isabella screamed. Adrian threw his arm across Audrey and his mother, pinning them to the leather seats as the car fishtailed. "Reverse, get us out of here!" Adrian roared. Matteo shifted gears, but before he could accelerate, a heavy truck smashed into the rear SUV, crushing it against the guardrail. They were boxed in. "Down! Get down!" Adrian shouted. Gunfire erupted from the woods lining the highway. Bullets hammered against the armored glass, sounding like hail on a tin roof. The glass spiderwebbed but held. "They're on the ridge," Matteo yelled, drawing his sidearm. "We're sitting ducks. Get the car moving," Adrian commanded, grabbing the submachine gun from the floor. "Push the burning wreck if you have to." Matteo floored the accelerator. The heavy SUV surged forward. He aimed for the gap between the burning lead car and the median. The heat was intense as they passed the flames, licking at the paint of their vehicle. Just as they cleared the wreckage, a tire blew out, shot by a sniper. The SUV spun uncontrollably. The world became a blur of grey-skinned black asphalt. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut and hugged Isabella. She felt the car tip. Gravity vanished for a terrifying second, and then they slammed onto the driver's side. The impact was bone-shattering, the airbags deployed with the smell of burnt dust. For a moment, there was silence, ringing and absolute. "Audrey!" Adrian's voice was a croak. Audrey coughed, pushing the deflated airbag away. She was dangling in her seatbelt. I'm okay. Isabella." The old woman was whimpering, unconscious but breathing. "We have to move," Adrian said. "They're coming." Adrian kicked the sunroof, which was now facing sideways. The glass shattered. He climbed out first, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. He reached down and pulled Audrey up. "Mama!" Audrey gasped, reaching back for the old woman. "I've got her." Matteo's voice came from the front. The big security chief was bleeding from his nose, but he was moving. He unbuckled Isabella and passed her frail body up to Adrian. They spilled out onto the cold highway. The scene was apocalyptic. Smoke billowed from the lead car. The rear car was silent. "Into the woods," Adrian ordered, hoisting his mother into his arms effortlessly, despite his injuries. "We can't fight them on the open road." "Adrian, look," Audrey pointed. 3 black sedans had pulled up 50 yards back. Men were pouring out, men in tactical gear. At the front was a man in a camel hair coat, walking leisurely among the carnage. "Marco Vitti." "Moretti," Marco shouted, his voice carrying over the wind. Nowhere left to run. Lupo. Adrian's face twisted into a snarl. He shoved his mother toward Audrey. Take her. Go into the tree line. Matteo, go with them. Get them to the extraction point. What are you doing? Audrey grabbed his arm. I'm buying you time, Adrian said, checking the magazine of his gun. I can hold them off from behind the wreck. No, Audrey screamed. You said we go together. Audrey, go. Adrian roared a sound so terrifying it made her flinch. Save my mother. If you love me, save her. He pushed her away and turned, opening fire on the approaching Vitti soldiers. Matteo grabbed Audrey's arm. Come on, Miss Rossi. We have to move. Audrey looked back. Adrian was crouched behind the overturned SUV, firing controlled bursts. He was 1 man against 20. He was going to die. She let Matteo drag her and Isabella into the dense tree line. The ground was wet with slush. Isabella was waking up, moaning in confusion. Enzo dove, Enzo, she cried. He's coming, Nonna. Audrey lied, tears streaming down her face. He's right behind us. They ran for 10 minutes deep into the forest. The sounds of gunfire grew distant, but didn't stop. That meant Adrian was still alive. Suddenly, Matteo stopped. He grunted and fell to one knee. Matteo. Audrey dropped to his side. He clutched his side. Blood was soaking through his suit jacket. He had been hit during the crash or the escape. I can't, Matteo wheezed. He pulled a heavy pistol from his holster and pressed it into Audrey's hand. Take the trail north. 2 miles. There's an old hunting cabin. My brother knows the place. Call him. He slumped forward, unconscious. Audrey stood alone in the freezing woods. An old woman with dementia, a dying bodyguard, and a gun she barely knew how to hold. The gunfire behind them had stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. It meant the fight was over. Audrey, Isabella whispered, trembling. Have we lost? Audrey looked at the gun in her hand. She thought of her father, the coward who ran. She thought of Adrian, the wolf, who stood and fought. She clicked the safety off, just as Adrian had shown her once in the library. No, Nonna, Audrey said, her voice turning into steel. We haven't lost, but we aren't running anymore. She heard the crunch of footsteps on dry leaves. Someone was coming from the direction of the highway. Audrey stepped in front of Isabella, raised the heavy pistol, and aimed at the figure emerging from the mist. The figure emerged from the grey mist like a wraith. He was wearing a camel hair coat that was now stained with mud and dark splatters of blood. It was Marco Vitti. He wasn't alone. 2 of his soldiers flanked him, their weapons raised but casual, as if the hunt was already over. Marco was smiling a cruel, triumphant twist of lips that made Audrey's stomach turn. Well, well, Marco drawled, stepping over a fallen log. The little nurse has claws. Audrey didn't lower the gun. Her arms shook the weight of the steel heavy in her grip, but she kept the barrel pointed at Marco's chest. Behind her, Isabella whimpered, clutching the back of Audrey's coat. Stay back, Audrey warned. Her voice sounded foreign to her ears, low, guttural. Put the toy away, sweetheart. Marco laughed, wiping a smear of soot from his cheek. It's over. The wolf is dead. I watched his car burn. There's no one left to save you. The words hit Audrey like a physical blow. The wolf is dead. A soundless scream tore through her chest, but she swallowed it down. If Adrian was gone, She was the only thing standing between this monster and Isabella. Grief would have to wait. "If he's dead," Audrey said, her finger tightening on the trigger, "then you have nothing left to bargain with, and I have nothing left to lose." Marco stopped. The amusement faded from his eyes, replaced by annoyance. "Kill the old woman. Grab the girl. She'll fetch a high price in Naples." The two soldiers raised their rifles. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut, pulled the trigger, and fired. The gun kicked violently, nearly flying out of her hand. The shot went wide, hitting a tree, but the noise was thunderous. It made the soldiers pause for a fraction of a second, and in that fraction of a second, the woods came alive. A single shot rang out sharp, precise, distinct from Audrey's wild fire. The soldier on the left dropped instantly, a hole in the center of his forehead. Marco spun around, confusion warping his face. "Who?" Before he could finish, a shadow detached itself from the thick trunk of an oak tree behind them. Adrian Moretti did not look like a man. He looked like a revenant risen from hell. His shirt was torn to shreds. His left arm hung uselessly at his side, dripping blood, and his face was a mask of ash and fury. But his right hand was steady, holding a handgun with the calm precision of a reaper. "You didn't watch the car burn long enough, Marco," Adrian rasped. Marco's eyes went wide. He scrambled for his own weapon, but he was too slow. Bang! The second soldier fell. Now it was just the two dons, the King of New York and the usurper. "Adrian, wait," Marco stammered, backing away. His hands raised. "We can make a deal. The territories. You touched my family," Adrian said, limping forward. Each step looked agonizing, but he didn't stop. He walked past Audrey, placing himself between her and the threat. "You hunted my mother like an animal." "It was business," Marco screamed. "No." Adrian raised the gun. "It was suicide." Two shots echoed through the silent forest. Marco Vitti fell backward into the wet slush, staring up at the grey sky, his ambition bleeding out into the dirt. Silence returned to the woods, heavier than before. Adrian stood over the body for a moment, making sure. Then the adrenaline that had been holding him together seemed to evaporate. He swayed his knees, buckling. "Adrian!" Audrey dropped her gun and rushed to him, catching him just as he collapsed. They fell to the forest floor together. Audrey frantically pressed her hands against the wound on his shoulder, her tears finally spilling over, mixing with the blood on his skin. "You're alive," she sobbed. "You're alive." Adrian looked up at her. His blue eyes were hazy, his skin pale and clammy. He reached up with his good hand, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek. "I told you," he whispered, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. "I would burn the city before I let them hurt you." "Shh, save your strength," Audrey cried, looking around for help. "Matteo is down. Is Mama okay?" Adrian asked, his voice barely audible. Isabella knelt beside them. In the chaos, her dementia seemed to have receded, replaced by the primal instinct of a mother. She took her son's hand and kissed it. "Sono qui, Enzo. Sono qui." "I am here, Enzo. I am here." "Audrey," Adrian wheezed. "The pocket of my coat." Audrey reached into his torn jacket. Her fingers brushed against something hard and velvet. She pulled out a small, blood-stained box. "I was going to wait," Adrian murmured, his eyes fighting to stay open, "until Palermo. But just in case." He couldn't finish the sentence. His eyes rolled back and his hand went limp in hers. "Adrian, Adrian." Audrey screamed his name to the trees, to the sky, to anyone who would listen. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to wail. 6 months later, the sun in Sicily was different from the sun in New York. It was golden heavy and smelled of lemons and sea salt. The terrace of the villa overlooked the Tyrrhenian Sea. The garden was in full bloom, a riot of bougainvillea and jasmine. Isabella sat in a wicker chair, dozing in the warmth. She looked frail but peaceful. Audrey stood by the stone railing, looking out at the water. She wore a white sundress, and on her finger a diamond ring caught the light, the same ring she had pulled from a bloody pocket in the woods of New York. She heard the cane before she saw him. Adrian walked out onto the terrace. He moved slower now, and he would likely walk with a cane for the rest of his life. The nerve damage in his leg was permanent, a souvenir from the crash. But he was alive. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice low and warm. Audrey leaned back into him, covering his hands with hers. "I was thinking about the first time I saw you. You looked so angry." "I was angry," Adrian admitted. "I was a man starving to death, looking at a feast I couldn't touch. Until you spoke." Audrey turned in his arms to face him. The scars on his face had faded, but the intensity in his eyes remained. He wasn't just the wolf anymore. He was her husband. "Sing for me," he asked. Audrey smiled. She looked over at Isabella, then back at Adrian. Softly, she began to hum the old Sicilian lullaby, "Chiuri, chiuri." Adrian closed his eyes, listening to the voice that had saved his mother, saved his soul, and started a war. They weren't in a cage anymore. They were free. But Audrey knew the truth. She hadn't just stolen the mafia boss's heart. She had kept it. And in return, he had given her the world. And that is the story of Audrey and Adrian. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who need love the most. Adrian Moretti thought he could buy safety and intimidate the world into silence, but in the end it wasn't his guns or his money that saved him. It was a waitress with a kind heart and a song from the old country. They found peace in Palermo, but they had to walk through fire to get there. It shows us that love isn't just about romance. It's about sacrifice, grit, and standing your ground when the whole world is burning around you. Thank you so much for listening to this story. If Audrey's bravery touched your heart, or if Adrian's loyalty gave you chills, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done in the woods? Would you have run, or would you have picked up the gun like Audrey? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We have a dark romance involving a billionaire and a runaway bride coming up next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next chapter.